years between Fran and Betty,
Yeah,
and Sue, the one here, and then Margie's the oldest.
okay.
Where's Fran hiding?
She's at the hospital with her sister.
Oh. We brought your Tupperware thing back. She'd given us some food, so the one on the table is yours.
See that towel if they were doing a baptism this morning?
No, I don't know what that's doing there. I didn't put it there. So I'll just move it. Front seats. Oh, there's a book back there you can have too. There's a pile of 5 books.
Okay.
I got them for everybody.
That's been gone.
It's about, no. I bought them, but they were only 75 cents. They were on sale. It's about the canons of Dort. It's
Okay.
an interpretation of the canons of Dort by a pastor I like. So I think it'll be helpful, useful, whatever.
Well, we're called, the only churches are Baptist.
Oh, yeah?
Did you guys go?
No.
No?
The church they were going to, the minister was like, well, some lady asked something about church history, so Paul bought her a book on it. The pastor got all bent out of the shape,
Oh,
because Paul gave her the book, because maybe the book knows more than he does.
right.
And he goes, he told the lady, well, if you're reading that book, that means you're not reading your Bible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like the Catholics. Just go to church and do what the Pope says.
We were learning about those people in history.
Catholics?
The Pope.
Yep. Yeah, there's still a Pope. He's a real whack job.
Mark rescued us from the airport Friday night.
Mark was wheels, huh?
Your Uber driver?
Only wore a mask.
And it was a hard landing too, my goodness.
What, in Arcata? They say that's one of the hardest airports in the world to fly into. It's like landing on an aircraft carrier. It's a short field on the top of a hill. Looks like it's about time, huh? Oh, one more minute.
Guys, we come in kind of over a ridge there and then have to,
Yep. And if you overshoot, you're going to fall off another cliff. So
yeah. No, I think they put sand down first,
oh,
like
yeah,
kind of like
a sand trap
ramps for trucks.
for a track, huh?
But I
that's-
don't want to be in the plane when we get to the emergency ramp.
No, because if they hit the sand, then the landing gear is going to break off. Then you slide. Oh, let's see, we're going to need. Belgic Confession. Doctrine of Election we did last week. Okay, we'll get started. We'll start with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for the beautiful sunny day. We ask for your Spirit to be with us this morning as we study your words and help us to worship you in spirit and in truth. In your name, amen. So I'll start by reading from the Belgic Confession, Article 17. It's on page 861 if you want to follow along. It's called The Recovery of Fallen Man. We believe that our good God, by his marvelous wisdom and goodness, seeing that man had plunged himself in this manner into both physical and spiritual death and made himself completely miserable, set out to find him, though man, trembling all over, was fleeing from him. And he comforted him, promising to give him his son, born of a woman, to crush the head of the serpent and to make him blessed. So another short one from the Belgic Confession. But now we'll sing Psalm 5.
Question on that.
Yeah.
Is that to, and would make him happy, is that a reference to God, to man, or both?
I'm assuming it would be to man, because I don't think God is ever not happy. So it must be to man, to make man happy. Psalm 5. The tune is Jesus, Lover of My Soul, if you know that tune. But it's a short psalm, and hopefully you'll catch the tune of it quickly.
What number?
Stand to sing Psalm 5. Oh, this isn't the short one. It must be in the worship that I have the short one. Send to my sighs and groans, hear my cry, my King, my God. I will pray to you alone. When the morning comes, O Lord, you shall hear my pleading cries. I will watch when comes the dawn. I will bring my sacrifice. Surely you are not a God who in evil takes delight. Evil shall not dwell with you, nor the proud stand in your sight. Evildoers, Lord, you hate, lying ones you will lay waste, and who murder and deceive. God the Lord abhors and hates. But in your great love will I come into your house of grace. Reverent I will worship there, bowing toward your holy place. Guide me safely, O my Lord, in your perfect righteousness. Since my enemies are near, make straight paths before my face. One word they say is true, from their heart destruction comes, and their throats are open graves. Yet they flatter with their tongues. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them by their counsels fall. Snare them in the schemes they plan, for against you they rebel. Let all those who flee to you find their refuge and be glad. Let them ever sing for joy. Over them protection spread. Those who truly love your name magnify you with their praise. You will bless the righteous Lord, shielding him with all your praise. You may be seated. I don't know if you noticed, but this is considered to be one of the imprecatory psalms, meaning that it's God's curse on the wicked. And that's a lot of what we're going to be studying today about Sodom and Gomorrah, is God cursing the wicked and yet protecting the righteous. So last week, we studied Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 through 11. And in that chapter, Abraham interceded with God to spare the wicked city of Sodom if two angels could find only 10 righteous people there. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to earth and said, "Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So Lot feared for the safety of these two men, they're unknown visitors. He doesn't know yet that they're angels. In fact, he probably doesn't even know what angels are. But he begs them to come into his home. And they do, and he makes them a feast. But we're told he uses unleavened bread. That means that he's in a hurry. He doesn't want them to hang around too long, and he doesn't want dinner to take forever. It could take hours to bake leavened bread. So it's a quick meal, and that's because he wants them to get an early start. He's assuming or hoping that they're going to leave the city in the morning, because this isn't a place you want to stay. And the next verses. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we may know them carnally." Now, in this passage, it's obvious that we're talking about sodomy, homosexuality, but it's in a worse form than usual, in the rape form, where these people want to gang rape the visitors. Then the next verses. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, "Please, my brothers, do not so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish, but do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they've come under the shadow of my roof." Now, we've never heard of Lot being married before now, and in the movie we watched on movie night, they had it wrong. They had Lot married and with daughters already when Abram left Haran. That seems unlikely. It appears that when he chose to go to Sodom, he moved to Sodom so the farmland would make his sheep fatter. But while he was there, he must have met a lady, and now he has 2 teenage girls who are apparently still virgins. They're probably about 13 years old. Lot offers the wicked men his daughters instead of the visitors. In Eastern society, if you take someone under your roof, you are obligated with the cost of your life to protect them. And even though he promises them virgin girls, that cannot appease homosexual rapists. They don't want girls, they want pretty boys. So the angels now intervene. They said, "Stand back." Oh, pardon me. No, this isn't the angels. This is the wicked people. They said, "Stand back." They said, "This one came in to stay here, but he acts as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. Well, when this mob rushes to grab Lot and break down the door, then the angels intervene. They pull Lot in the house, they close the door, and they strike the men outside with blindness. Now, in our culture, there's been a concerted effort to remove any biblical objections to homosexuality. But we looked at Jude 6 and 7, Ezekiel 16, 48 to 50, and Leviticus 18, verses 22 to 25. We won't read all those, but I will read you the Leviticus verses again, because this is a list of the worst sins in the Bible that deserve death. They're called abominations. This is Leviticus 18, 22 to 25. "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Nor shall you mate with any animal to defile yourself with it. Nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is perversion. Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants." So in Leviticus, homosexuality and bestiality are 2 of the sins that defile the land, and God calls perversions and abominations. And because these sins defile the land, and the land belongs to God, God therefore brings judgments to destroy those wicked from the land. Isaiah 3:8 tells us one reason Sodom was especially bad. It says that they don't even hide their sins. They don't even pretend to hide their sins. They revel in their sins. They are proud of being wicked. And this is the process of evil in a group, which is similar to the process of evil in an individual. So we looked at Psalm 1:1, which shows the process of evil. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. So what the verse implies is that the sinner starts by walking by or toward ungodliness. But then he stands there so he can enjoy it a little longer, but finally he sits down and wallows in it like a pig who can't get enough. A pervert has seared his or her own soul. The conscience has been so trampled that it no longer functions in a pervert. Good and bad is only what makes him feel good or feel bad. And that's now what our culture teaches, is the definition of good and bad, what you feel about it. But in Psalm 1:1, every level of sin is described in a group. As Westerners, we only think about individuals, but God designed humans to work in groups. We were designed in the image of God to have dominion, and dominion is done in a group, not as an individual. Adam failed, so now our dominion is corrupted. Families are fallen, clans are fallen, and nations are fallen. And yet it is the power of the group that either strengthens virtue or strengthens wickedness. A group of Christians together as a church can be a powerful tool for good, but a group of wicked humans together is a terrifying tool of evil. Culture is the ultimate consequence of group influence. If enough people start thinking the same way and spread the news and others are convinced, a sort of tidal wave can occur. Group evil is a widespread agreement at a cultural level that evil is acceptable because everyone does it, or everyone believes it, or everyone practices it. And so we looked at Colossians 2:8, for example. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. So Paul warns the church not to be cheated by philosophy and empty deceit according to the tradition of men. And where does this tradition of men come from? From the basic principles of the world. You see, when Adam sinned, the whole universe fell, and sin became its basic principle. Now, the Apostle John calls it the world. So we read 1 John 2:15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lusts of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. So John says that the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, these are the basic principles of group sin. And he calls it the world. It's passing away, it's temporary, because God will destroy it all soon. But this is the kingdom that every unbeliever lives in, basks in, and wallows in like a pig. The Sodomites are just the ultimate example of perversion. They as a group accepted that their lusts are all that mattered for life. Now our nation has not yet become entirely full of perverts, though it now accepts them. They are not yet violent, but they will become so eventually, because sin always grows in intensity. So what are we supposed to do about it? Cities are usually the cesspools, because like a plague, sin is contagious, and it spreads between people in groups, and cities are giant groups of sinners. But obviously cities are also the place where the gospel is most needed. So all we can do then is to be the best salt and light we can in a dark place. God will have to deal with the wickedness in his own ways, which we cannot predict or assist. So that's the review. Today we continue with Genesis chapter 19, the story of Sodom and Lot. So the context now is, we will start in verses 12 through 14. The rapist homosexuals are outside trying to find the door even though they're blind. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. Now you wonder if Lot knew that these men are messengers of God before they speak like this. Maybe he thought they were a little strange, but he didn't apparently know they were angels. Did Lot see the men get blinded outside? We don't know. Probably not. He may have heard the screams and confusion, though, so he may have figured that something had happened. But apparently the daughters were not at the feast with the family and the two men. Because even though Lot offered to bring his daughters out to the wicked men, now the angels ask Lot, "Is there anyone you want to save, like sons or daughters or sons-in-law?" So it sounds like the feast was just between Lot and his wife and the two men. The daughters weren't there. Now it's interesting also that they don't mention the wife. You might speculate that they don't mention the wife because they know that she's going to become a pillar of salt. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think angels know the future like God does, unless God told them, which I doubt. They know, though, that destruction is coming soon. And although the angels say, "We are about to destroy this place," it's not just their power, because later they say that God will soon destroy this place. So I think they're saying "we" in the sense that they're part of the mission that will destroy. So I believe that it's God's power that does it, but it's the angels who direct it. They're sort of like the reconnaissance guys on the ground, calling in an airstrike. They're giving them the coordinates. Take this place out. And we also know that because they're going to leave Zor out. The original plan was to wipe out all 5 cities. But Lot said, "Oh, no, please let me flee to Zor." And the angels say, "Okay, fine. We'll spare Zor." So obviously the angels are targeting the judgment. But another interesting thing that the angels say here is that the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord. Now, Jesus said that same thing a few days earlier to Abraham. So the question is, who is doing the outcrying? Who is calling out for justice? In the time of the Exodus, Jesus often tells Moses that he hears the outcry of his oppressed people in Egypt. And that makes sense because they're victims and they're being oppressed. But in Sodom, who in Sodom or the other 4 cities is calling out for the justice of God? Nobody. There aren't any righteous people there except one that we know of, Lot. So where is this outcry coming from? I believe that this is something of an allegorical way of saying from what we read in Leviticus 18. God said that when abominations fill the land, he will purify it. So he will purify the land. So my belief is that even though no one in the cities is calling for justice, the creation itself wants justice. The land itself is burdened by this wicked sinning. However, we can also mention that Lot himself might have been praying for this. Not that he knew exactly what he was praying for. So I want you to turn over to one of 2 passages we'll look at today, 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2 is very similar to the verses we read from Jude last week. In fact, we think that Peter and Jude might have been friends or at least shared each other's letter because it's almost word for word similar. 2 Peter chapter 2 verses 5 through 10. We're right in the middle of a sentence. First, Peter talked about the wicked angels and the flood. Then he gets to Sodom and Lot. "And he did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly." And here we get to the Sodom and Gomorrah. "And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly. But delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man, dwelling among them, tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. They are presumptuous, self-willed. They are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries." Now, there's a lot of useful pieces in these verses from Peter. First of all, One of the reasons that God brought this significant judgment on Sodom was to make them a clear example to the later ungodly who think they can get away with abominations. This is, of course, one reason why the homosexual community hates the Bible, because they do not want to be afraid of God or judgment. But the most relevant piece for us today is about Abraham's nephew Lot. Lot is called righteous twice, and the word godly is used. Now, considering how little information we have about Lot in Genesis, and very little of it is good, we must agree that Peter was given special revelation here about Lot being righteous and godly. Because if all you had was Genesis, you wouldn't think that Lot was very righteous or very godly. So the Holy Spirit obviously told Peter the truth. Here's the verse again that's most important. He delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man, dwelling among them, tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. So we can be very judgmental. We think ourselves to be really righteous, and more righteous than Lot, because we would have left that evil place. So now ask yourself, why did Lot stay? Based on what Peter says, I believe that Lot stayed because of his family when they refused to leave. He probably begged them to move out to live with Abraham, but they refused. And in such a case, it would have been sinful of Lot to abandon his wife and children, even if they are in a wicked place. I presume that Lot's wife had not committed adultery. There was no reason for him to divorce her. Now, his daughters may be entrapped by this wicked culture, but they're still virgins, even though they're engaged to be married. So the two girls are not yet rebellious or immoral in those ways. In order for Lot to be righteous and live in a cesspool of iniquity, I believe he couldn't leave because his family couldn't leave or wouldn't leave. So he was kind of trapped by his family. He's forced to stay, yet he is still godly. Now, why is he still godly? Peter tells us that his own conscience is still troubled and horrified by the evils around him. We're told that he was tormented by the city dwellers' evils every single day. Having a sensitive conscience is a very strong sign of true faith. Hating evil is a sign of virtue. Satan's minions cannot hate evil, they love evil. So to hate evil is a sign that a person is a believer. And this is also something of a comfort to me, and it could be to you also, that simply living in a place that is evil is not evil in itself. Lot remained righteous even though he lived in a cesspool. If we indeed cannot leave California because few better places exist, it may well be that God will use us in the same way he used Lot in Sodom. As much as Lot hated Sodom, Sodom also hated him. You could see that in their words from last week. They planned to abuse Lot more than they abused the angels. They called him a judge and a stranger among us. That means that they were reminded by God that they were perverse, and they hated that because they had one virtuous person among them. They viewed Lot as a stranger and a judge who dared to interfere with their abominations. So it is quite possible that the last task of godly people in a cesspool is that there's nothing they can do except be salt and light and be hated for the sake of righteousness. Now, I came across a very interesting summary of a book written in 1947. It was called Family and Civilization by Dr. Carl Zimmerman. He was a sociologist from Harvard University, and he studied the falls of empires throughout history. And this is all, I came across this in a Chuck Swindoll book, A Biography of Abraham. Now, here are the 5 points summarized by Dr. Zimmerman. These are the 5 characteristics of a civilization that is about to die. Number 1, marriage lost its sacredness. Divorce became commonplace, and alternative forms of marriage were accepted. Number 2, feminist movements undermined complementary or cooperating roles, and women lost interest in mothering in order to pursue personal power and wealth. Number 3, parenting became increasingly difficult, public disrespect for parents and authority increased, delinquency and promiscuity became normal. Number 4, adultery was celebrated rather than punished. People who broke their marriage vows were admired. And last, there was an increased tolerance for incest and homosexual sex and a giant increase in sex-related crimes. So he wrote that 75 years ago, before the sexual revolution of the 1960s. So now back to Genesis 19, verse 14. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be joking. Now, if you don't understand the ancient system of marriage, you might be confused. In the ancient system of marriage, you got married and then you lived apart for a year before you actually lived together. So it was like an engagement, but you were still technically married. Now, since Lot told the people that his daughters were still virgins, that tells you that they were engaged but not yet living together. So they're married technically, but not yet consummated their marriages. But the young men, the sons-in-law, didn't believe Lot. They thought he was kidding. I mean, after all, it sounds like he woke them up from sleep and said, "You got to get out of the city," and they thought he was playing a practical joke on them. Now verses 15 through 17. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass when they brought them outside that they said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed." Now apparently all night long after their feast, and after the men were struck blind, Lot was trying to persuade his sons-in-law, and probably also his wife and his daughters, that they had to flee the city. And at dawn the angels warned him again, but he still lingered. So finally the angels grab all 4 people and drag them out of the city. It almost sounds like the family of Lot was in shock or in a trance of indecision. They just couldn't decide what to do. Not until they got outside the city was the spell broken. And again the angels warned them, "Flee to the mountains. Do not look behind you, lest you be destroyed." Now the closest mountains were due east, whether Sodom is north or south of the Dead Sea. They were steep hills, very craggy, with narrow arroyos or ravines, and with caves, so it would be a great place to hide. Now verses 18 to 22. Then Lot said to them, "Please, no, my lords. Indeed, now, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you've increased your mercy, which you've shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it's just a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live." And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also. I will not overthrow that city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. Now, this is kind of odd that Lot is making excuses why he can't flee to the mountains or the hills, which are only a few miles east. It's not that far. He says that some evil might overtake him and kill him, and he instead proposes to go to a small town nearby called Zoar. Now, the fact is, as far as we understand archaeology, that Zoar is probably farther away than the mountains are. But maybe the problem is not the distance, maybe it's the difficulty of the terrain. You see, there's roads between the cities of the plain, but there are no good roads to the hills because there's nothing in the hills. So I'm wondering, or guessing perhaps, maybe Lot has grown fat, or at least he's not in good health, and he doesn't think he can make it in the hills. Why would that be? Well, I suspect that years of stress over his family and their wickedness might have worn him down. He's showing no clear-headedness in this chapter at all, or in the next bad scenes we'll see next week. He's hoping that the angels will spare a small town for him and his family to hide in from the judgment. So the angels agree and say an interesting thing. Hurry and escape there, because I can do nothing until you arrive there. The implication is that the destruction will come from God, but the angels will direct it to the targets. So they're basically saying, hurry up and get there, and then we can call in our strike. And today, the last verses we'll look at are verses 23 to 29, which is the event itself. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw, behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plains, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. I forgot to bring the book. I was going to show it to you. I read a book that was written 9 years ago by Dr. Stephen Collins. It's called Discovering the City of Sodom. Now, he's an archaeologist, and it's a very interesting book. He tries to prove a number of things, but one of them is that Sodom was north of the Dead Sea, not south of it, but also that there was a real natural disaster that destroyed the place. I think he's a Christian. It's not clear, but he does use the Bible literally and historically, so he's at least a conservative scholar. And he makes a very good case for his ideas, and if any of you want to borrow it, I'll try to bring it Wednesday. The location and the date are somewhat important to the Bible story. By being north of the Dead Sea rather than south, Abraham would in fact have an excellent view from his hilltop, because he'd be much closer than if this town and plain were far, far away south of the Dead Sea. In other words, if the man is correct about the site being north of the Dead Sea, Abram could see it only about 30 miles away. If it's south of the Dead Sea, it's 50 miles away. It'd be a lot harder to see. The dates also roughly coincide with the time of Abraham and the Jews before they were enslaved in Egypt. But the most interesting chapters of this book are near the end, when they analyze the layers of ash up to 24 inches deep, but also pieces of pottery that were turned to glass on top. It's called trinitite. Now, I believe the trinitite got its name after the Trinity tests in Los Alamos, New Mexico, when we tested atom bombs there. And we put all kinds of rubble out there to see what would happen to it when the atom bomb went off. And pottery and sand turns to glass when an atom bomb goes off near it. And the fragments they found in this archaeological dig of pottery have this same trinitite layer over the top. In other words, the pottery sort of melted into glass. Now, his theory is that a comet exploded over Sodom and Gomorrah, similar to what we think might have happened in Russia about 120 years ago, called the Tunguska explosion, where hundreds of miles of trees were laid out flat like a volcano had gone off, but there's no volcanoes there. And so the theory is that a comet exploded there. Thus, if that happened, most of the people of those cities were instantly vaporized or crushed as the superheated wind blew down all the walls and buildings of the cities in the area. And as is common in volcanic explosions, a sudden heat event also causes lightning and tornadoes. The phrase used in Genesis 19, swept away, implies that the cities became nothing but rubble. There wasn't much left after the explosion. And as Peter wrote, God made an example of those cities. You remember during the flood, God destroyed almost the whole world, but then he promised never to do that again, never to wipe out all life again. But God is now showing that he will continue to wipe out the wicked, just not on a global scale, on a city scale. He'll wipe them out. It would be similar to an atom bomb going off with a circumference of about 30 miles in every direction. So quite a large nuclear weapon. Now, it went off when Lot and his family had entered the town of Zoar, and then the fire and brimstone came down. But it says, his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, if you want to see what Jesus says about Sodom and Lot's wife, turn over to Luke chapter 17, because Jesus talks about them both. I'll probably be preaching on that in a month or two, because now we're in Luke 16. But Luke 17, chapter 28 to 33. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, They bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. So for those liberals who claim that Sodom and Gomorrah were never destroyed, they never existed, it's all a myth, then Jesus is either a liar or he's crazy when he describes these events here in Luke. But this also gives us some insight into why Lot's wife was killed. I mean, what's so bad about looking back? Well, for one thing, the angels told them, do not look back lest you be destroyed. So they were warned. But why was she looking back, and what did it mean? Now, obviously, there are other interpretations. I think they're bad ones. One interpretation is that Lot's wife didn't really get turned into a pillar of salt. That what happened is there is this it's still there. On a place called Mount Sodom near the Dead Sea, there's this giant jutting rock made of sandstone that sticks up like 60 feet in the air. And it looks vaguely like a woman or a human. And so people say, there's Lot's wife. And so this myth got built out around this rock being a tourist attraction. But that really doesn't make any sense. Most women aren't 60 feet tall and made of sandstone, and etc. Another fairly feasible idea, at least, is a retranslation of that verse. It is possible to translate that to say, not that Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt, but that she looked back and saw that the whole land had turned into salt. And that is a potential translation, meaning that Sodom had been blasted into shiny dust. The trouble is you still have to have her die, because in the next paragraph, she's not going to be with Lot and the daughters. So even if she didn't get turned into a pillar of salt, she died there on the spot. But Jesus warns these people that when the next big judgment comes, and that would be the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, just flee and don't stop to pick up your goods, just run for your lives. Looking back means delay. He says, get away as fast as you can. And then Jesus adds that if you try to save your old life, you will die. In other words, don't stop and get your goods, just run. This is what Lot's wife, he even says, remember Lot's wife. She refused to give up her old life to start a new life. She looked back, meaning that she wanted to go back. My guess is that physically and literally, they got to the city of Zoar. The gates were open. Lot and his daughters ran through first. The wife was running behind them. And while they ran around the corner behind the doors, she stopped and looked back, and then the air burst happened, and she got fried and turned into ash. That would be my interpretation. Basically, she got microwaved and was just a solid crust of flesh, and then probably collapsed into dirt. The last point, though, I want to make is about Abraham and Jesus. And this is likely another big test for Abraham. He probably thought that his prayers and his intercession with Jesus would keep Sodom from being destroyed, because he got Jesus down to 10 people. If only 10 people are there, he won't destroy it. But now he goes out to the same spot where he prayed with Jesus and sees the city is destroyed. So now he knows there weren't 10. But he does not know that Lot was saved. He has no idea. We know that Zoar was spared, but it may have only been temporarily, because as soon as the wife dies, Lot and the daughters decide, oh, it's not safe here, and they go to the mountains. We'll run into that next week. So perhaps then Zoar was destroyed as well. We don't really know. But as far as we know, God never told Abraham that he saved Lot and his daughters. In fact, it is possible that Abraham never saw or heard about Lot again. If he did ever meet Lot again, it was not for many years, and you'll see why next week. So as far as Abraham knows, Lot and his family were swept away with the wicked, because there weren't even 10 righteous there. But he's wrong if he thinks thus. In fact, we're told that God spared Lot and his family for the sake of Abraham. This time, though, God didn't use an ark. He didn't wait 100 years. He used angels to drag them out of danger on at least the first leg of their journey. Now, obviously, this is not a guarantee that God never destroys places without people dying, without righteous people dying. And this is actually the silly basis upon which dispensationalists cling to their rapture theory. They insist that God will never let the righteous suffer under judgments of God. And they're wrong. They're right technically. God, when righteous people die in judgments of God, it's not a judgment on them, it's a judgment on the wicked. It's actually just bringing those people home. So they're right about it not being a judgment. However, the righteous are harmed and killed in widespread events of judgment. Do you think there were no Christians killed when the 110,000 people died in the tsunami? Of course not. Of course there were Christians who died in the tsunami. So the righteous may die in widespread events of judgment. Lot, he didn't die, but he lost his house and his business and his property and his wife. And pretty soon he's going to lose all his daughters, in a sense, to great wickedness. The story of Sodom's destruction is more of a theological lesson for us, in that God will protect and save us from every real harm. In other words, being hurt or being killed is not a real harm. It just takes us to be with the Lord. Even if Lot had been roasted in Sodom, it would not have been true harm, because that righteous man of faith would join the Lord in eternity. Now, I have less hope for the wife and the daughters. We do also see the great care that God takes regarding his people and their covenant families. God sends supernatural beings to drag Lot and even his wicked family out of the city. They even take Lot away from danger. But it doesn't protect the family from themselves, however. Wifey dies soon. The daughters become corrupt within weeks. But temporarily they were protected from judgment thanks to the covenant with Abraham and Lot. So the blessings of the covenant you may look at as an opportunity. It is not certain salvation for family members who are not personally covenanted with Jesus. You might say that Jesus gives covenant families more knowledge, more opportunities, and more time to straighten up and thus receive the gospel. But Lot's wife failed to obey, and next week we'll see Lot's daughters fail to obey and the consequences of that. Let's pray. Dear Lord, your judgments are swift and serious, and yet your mercy is also great and kind. And even when great harms may befall us, they're not judgments upon us. They're not real harms. The harms are upon the wicked in your justice, but you protect us in your mercy in every case. We thank you for this promise, and we ask that those in covenant families all have a personal relationship with you and not miss this opportunity to turn to you. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, we'll have our worship service in about 40 minutes.